everybody, I'm so excited. I am Trish Jenkins. Welcome to Trish TV. And today my guest is the amazing, clever, compliantly brilliant Julie Garland McLellan. If I had known her a few years ago, I might not have gone to jail. Seriously, she knows her stuff. If I could have made one phone call to her and said, hey, I've got this going on, I'm thinking of doing this, she would have been the one to say, no, do this instead. That's how serious her job is. You might think that compliance is a bit dry and a bit boring. Well, I'm telling you, it is not. And Julie is a speaker, a keynote speaker. She is an expert in all things boardroom and compliance. And the great thing about her is that she brings it to life, as you're going to see. She brings it to life in a way that is relatable, real, and you're going to be so glad that you've heard what she's got to say, because a lot of people want to join boards for whatever reason, but if you're going to do that, it can be fabulous. It can be great, and it can be a joy. But there are some risks and dangers that you need to be aware of so that you do it well and you avoid those pitfalls. And that's why I've got this. Comes under my banner of resilient finance, due diligence. So, Julie, welcome and thank you for coming on and agreeing to talk with us.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
It really is. I'm just so thrilled. So tell us a little bit about your background, your expertise, and what you're known for.
I've got a fairly eclectic background. I started off work as a civil engineer, and the short story is if you're good at running civil engineering projects, you'll wind up running bits of companies and then whole companies, and then you'll wind up on boards. Wow. And that's what happened to me. But my first board, I was very lucky. I had an accountant who alerted me to the risks as well as the powers that the position entailed. And it just sounded so fantastic that I started reading about it, firstly because I couldn't believe that I could get into trouble if I did what my boss told me to do. And the answer is yes, I could. But wow. Secondly, the power of the board, the way in which the board is the thinking mind of the organization and the responsibility that comes with that. I just loved Spider-Man's Uncle Ben when he said, with great power comes great responsibility, because boards live that truth every day. And governance doesn't have to be all professors of accounting from Stanford University. It can actually, or lawyers from Harvard. It can actually be normal people making the best decisions they can in the best interests of the organization they serve. So I just love working with those people.
Yeah, the thing that I take away from that, you can get in trouble doing what your boss says.
Oh yeah,
my don't realize that is so key. And if we're able to, I'd like to talk to you about handling that and how to. Do you have some ideas on how to handle that if you find yourself in that position? What to say without giving yourself the sack?
Yeah, I think the first thing is if you are in a position, and this one comes up a lot for people who are on subsidiary boards. It came up for Guy Garland, who was the director of CPH, which was the James Packer company that owned the stake in Crown Casino. And he had to face a royal commission in which he said, well, I know I shouldn't have done it, but if I hadn't done what Mr. Packer asked me to do, I would have lost my job, so I had to do it. And the answer is, well, you thought you had to lose your job, but you didn't actually. Most people want staff who are ethical and straight and who know what they're doing. So one of the key things is to keep your boss informed of your duties and responsibilities and how good it is for the company to be seen to be handling those duties and responsibilities well. And if you've got a good boss, they'll sit up and take notice if you say things like, for example, I'd love to send you back all of the profits from our subsidiary to the overseas head office, but we can't do that by you sending me an invoice and me sending you the money, because we're going to start breaching tax legislation. And if anyone audits that, we'll both be in trouble.
Wow,
So
that's so
it's
good.
having the knowledge to, first of all, raise the issues. And secondly, you don't necessarily have to make those statements as assertions. You can make them as, can you explain to me how we handle? And do you have a process for making sure that these payments don't contravene? Because very often your boss hasn't got the faintest clue either.
Yeah, they're not
You
doing it on
found
purpose.
out something, but asking about it will set your boss off asking around head office and coming up with the right answers rather than just you jumping to do whatever your boss says.
Right.
And yeah, it takes a bit of skill, and you have to really think about, where am I coming from when I say this? Am I coming from that position of, I'm doing the best I can to help this company, which should be something that helps your boss as well? Or are you coming from a position of, I'm fearful, therefore I'm going to snap back at you, which is not going to please your boss at all?
No, I like what you said about ask, don't tell, so that you're putting it in their hands and saying, so help me understand, this seems to be, this could be a problem for us. You know, you're not saying it's you're doing the wrong thing, but help me understand, you know, what's the procedure, what do we need to find out, because this isn't actually compliant, so let's get this done together. And that way you're not being combative. And you know, and I want to encourage people in those positions where you've got to keep the details. It's really important. And you may be made to feel like, oh, you're a stick in the mud, you're not a team player, you know, especially in high-pressure sales companies as well. But you are there to be a safety net for them, to do the right, this with like compliance officers too, that you don't have to be made to feel like you're the problem stopping the company going forward, but it doesn't hurt to polish your people skills a little bit and just be a bit more conciliatory in the way that you approach it. That would be my, and that sounds like what you're saying, so that you're a team together and go, yeah, look, I'd love to, but I'm really sorry, I won't be able to do it that way. So you're not making your boss feel like he's a crook, whether he is or not. So I think that's really important, because people can feel so powerless to do things, and, and a lot of bosses don't realize just how, you know, people can be really frightened to approach you to say, hey, this isn't quite right. And, you know, so, well, that's really wise advice. Thank you for that. Yeah. Right. Well, so talk to me about, you've got some current issues in the news. I guess I know you're someone who follows the news, and then I see your very wonderful LinkedIn broadcasts and things, and it's just so wise. So tell me what's going on now.
Oh, well, the repercussions of the Crown Commission of Inquiry are still causing comment in director circles. The fact that so many once highly regarded company directors have been found to have been so asleep at the wheel, and that the staff hesitated to call to their attention things that the board really needed to be paying attention to, was quite shocking. And some of the misstatements that people have made about, oh, well, you know, it's really hard to find people to be on the boards of a casino. No, it's not. People get on the boards of registered clubs which are not paid positions, which carry similar anti-money laundering, anti-terrorism financing requirements, which involve them in personal responsibility and liability, and they do it for the joy of the job. And by the way, in New South Wales, if you're a director of a registered club, you actually have a mandatory training requirement, which is something that you don't have if you're a director of a listed board, which I think is really shocking and bad. but I can understand where that comes from.
Right.
So there's the whole issue of director skills, director qualifications, and what makes you a fit and proper person is front and foremost. Obviously, all directors are talking about solvency, they're talking about COVID, they're worried about their duty to provide a safe workplace for their people. And if those people happen to be working from home and get depressed because they're working from home, strangely enough, it's the directors who failed to provide a safe workplace.
Wow. So what you're saying is mental health, because that because I speak on resilience in the workplace, and it used to be that a lot of companies would think, oh, people just need to harden up, and not be such a crybaby and take care of that. Like mental health was kind of a thing, like for softies, and yet it has such an impact on productivity and the workplace that directors are having to sit up and take notice, because this COVID thing is not, COVID itself might go away, but the repercussions of that mental health deterioration are going to have a flow-on effect for a few years. And I just want to encourage anybody who might be watching, if you would like to contribute, ask a question or make a comment, then do let us know. Put that in and I'll see it here and I can show it up on the screen. I'd love you to join us and contribute. That'd be great. But these are really important things. This is not just about dry corporate and client stuff. This is about what directors and people in charge of companies need to sit up and take notice of, and especially in the next couple of years, because there will be people. I believe there's a court case going on at the moment. It might be in America. I don't know if it's here, but I heard about it early this week when I was doing a mental health first aid course, that someone committed suicide. Actually, we don't say committed anymore because it's not a crime, but someone took their own life and wrote a document laying blame at people in the workplace where they worked. And so now there's a lawsuit because of because of blame and what has happened. Are you aware of that? And can you speak to that?
I'm not aware of that case, but there was a very tragic case with Zurich Insurance a few years ago where a new chairman and a new company, new managing director were attempting to create levels of performance. I mean, everybody joins a board because they want to do well. The managing director was trying to hit some KPIs that were dodging, to use a non-technical term. So the chairman took on the role of looking at the corporate reporting to shareholders and other stakeholders so that the managing director could focus on the running of the company and the day-to-day management, which with hindsight was a bit of a disaster, but with foresight was a perfectly reasonable thing to do. Unfortunately, the chairman and the company's chief financial officer, CFO, disagreed about how to report some of the non-financial KPIs. The annual report was published. The CFO took his own life, leaving behind a letter that said that he really did not feel that the disclosures were correct. He felt he'd been pressured into them. He felt he'd gone against his own ethics and that the shareholders and the stock market were being misled by this report. And you can imagine the turmoil for the organization because, first of all, you've got shareholders saying, well, hang on, have I been misled? What have you told me? What are you going to tell me now? What's the difference? Should I buy? Should I sell? Should I sue? You've got a management team and a board, and particularly a chair, who are completely and utterly devastated that they could have had this impact and somebody could have been feeling that bad and they did not realize and did not help. The chair in particular was so traumatized, he actually resigned immediately, which anybody would tell you was a dumb thing to do because you are now outside the company fold looking still for protection as having made reasonable decisions under the circumstances, but you've now created a gap between you and the rest of the board. So under pressure, boards should hang together if they can. In fact, it's written in the margins of one of the original copies of the Declaration of Independence in America, which you can go and see in Pennsylvania if you ever get there. Somebody wrote in a little letter and in the margins, "Now we must hang together, for if we don't, we shall hang separately." But this was a huge disaster, and at the end of the day, people found that the annual report was correct, that the additional facts and figures would have been nice, but they weren't legally necessary. And so it really comes down to a question of how people felt about each other and what they were doing, and a culture and an environment in which people didn't discuss their feelings until it was too late. So that's one of the dangers of being on a board. And of course, you are responsible. If you've allowed that culture to start up, people in the government sector in Australia might remember Wollongong City Council, enormous allegations of fraud and malfeasance and wrongdoing, and a very glamorous lady called Beth Morgan who walked into court every morning wearing beautiful sunglasses and looking amazing. So of course it was always on the news. But the CEO of the council was found by the Independent Commission Against Corruption to have permitted a culture to develop in which corruption could flourish. That was their only finding against him. His career was ruined. His job was over. He spent months being vilified in the press and on the news bulletins. And that was their finding, that he'd allowed this culture to develop. So at the moment, governance is looking very seriously at the cultures that exist within organizations and the way in which the board and the CEO or the managing director become responsible for that, and the way in which they measure it and think about it and use it, which is a really interesting field of inquiry. And it's not a science, it's an art.
Right. It makes me think about diversity on boards, that when you have diversity, you're more likely to have people with differences of viewpoints that can see problems that others might. Whereas the tradition of involving people that, you want someone who shares your vision, but the habit of hiring people who are just like you. And in the past, let's face it, it's been jobs for the boys, the old white fella club. Well, that's one of the benefits of having a diverse range of people on there, is that you will get that give and take, that push and shove, and that have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And we have to have the maturity to not see that as pushback, as in an unhealthy pushback, but hold on, this is valuable contribution from those different viewpoints.
Yeah, and diversity is far more than just two different genders. It is about diversity of thought, which comes from diversity of perspective, which means you really, one of my favorite governance gurus from America is a gentleman by the name of Adam J. Epstein III, and he is a specialist in small cap governance. And if anybody wants to feel very insignificant, he defines small caps as less than $250 million worth of company.
Okay.
So he would consider most of us to be absolute nano caps. We'd go right through micro and out the other side. But he talks about peas in a pod. And he says, if you look around your boardroom table, ask yourself how many of your directors live in postcodes with the same socioeconomic demographic, drive the same sorts of imported luxury cars, send their children to the same sorts of private schools, play golf or ride bicycles, probably with each other, went to the same sorts of big name Australian universities, played sport with each other as young adults, and the answer should be no, half of the board just don't fit that.
Right.
Whereas if you look at the statistics with Australian boardrooms, the degree of interconnectivity between boards within different size companies is enormous. So the top 200 companies, most of the directors are only 2 degrees of separation away from anyone else on those boards. So they will be sitting on a board with someone who sits on a board with someone who sits on that board. It's very, I hesitate to use the word incestuous, but it's a very tight-knit and interrelated community. And what that gives you is the thinking that goes in that community. And you see that thinking, particularly when the board are under pressure, don't have much time, and are trying to make quick decisions in the absence of really good information. You just see them stuff up.
Yeah. And when you're
so
under pressure,
many examples.
When you're under pressure, you fall back to what feels comfortable, because what feels comfortable feels right, but is not necessarily right.
Yeah. And then you look, for example, at the recent disaster at AMP, where knowing that they had taken away somebody's bonus and given them a financial penalty for sexually harassing somebody who reported to him, they then promoted the person because on paper, that person was a brilliant executive and created a lot of wealth for the company. And you look at the board and you go, well, okay, there were women in that boardroom, but a lot of people in that boardroom were very new. The board got substantially changed with the Hain Financial Services inquiry. So most of those directors had less than 2 years experience in the company. They'd probably never met the person they were promoting. They had nothing to go on but hard data. They've come from a generation where hard numerical data was given precedence over more emotional, social data. The chairman of the board, in fact, married somebody that he had met whilst she was reporting to him, and would therefore have a completely different perspective on workplace relationships between an employee and their supervisor than perhaps would have been helpful in understanding this case. And you just see a disaster set up to happen. And you say, well, why was the board so drawn from that small social circle, and also so unwilling to raise those questions and say, look, Mr. Chair, your experience of this might be completely different to the experience of our employees.
Wow.
So with the best will in the world, you're going to struggle to understand.
You are. So in that case, would that have been that different departments were just not communicating?
No, I think the board was given information to make a decision. The decision would have been recommended based on an expectation of what the board would happily accept, which was numbers and past performance in generating profits. Other factors would have been played down.
Yes, but the people who made the decisions about not giving the fellow his bonus because of the sexual allegations, they wouldn't have been involved in that decision, I imagine, or they might not have been listened to.
Probably only peripherally involved. And this is another, we're straying out of board territory here and into personal observations of the way in which the senior executive ranks of large companies are organized. But what we often find with these larger companies is that the human resources department does not have an equal say amongst the other departments where the functional heads are reporting directly into the CEO. And they're seen more as a service partner. So we want to hire this person. you make the contracts, you make the arrangements, you handle the leave entitlements and the cars and the translocations from one place to another. But the human resources professionals that we have tend to be very much human resources specialists. They tend not to be people who've actually run a division themselves, who can sit at that table and say, look, hang on, this person has great financial results, but really questionable cultural alignment with what we're trying to build. Think again, chaps.
Yeah, again, the argument for more diversity on the boards, and not just because someone's a woman or Indigenous or something else, but people who have that variety of background, so that they have those different perspectives. Yeah. I think it's go on.
And a culture on the board where people are willing to listen and to ask the questions from the point of view of increasing knowledge and wisdom, rather than from the point of view of proving that what they want to do is right and what you're suggesting is wrong, which can sometimes happen when groups of humans get together to make decisions. So really having a board that tries, and St. Francis of Assisi once said, seek to understand, not to be understood. And it's really good advice for company directors. You really, when you are asking a question, you are not trying to uncover information or even to reach a decision. You're trying to help the board better understand all of the nuances of the decision that you will eventually as a group make. And that is, again, it's a mindset, it's an ethical way of approaching your work, but it is a large part of your duty.
Wow, that, it actually opens up that the joy of being, even though we're talking about serious things that and that can be problematic, the upside is, and I know you wanted to talk about the joy of being on a board and encouraging people to go on boards. It is that you can go on a board and really contribute and make a difference, and you can welcome new people onto a board because it's going to add that extra dimension to what you're doing if you've got a big enough mindset to be able to value the contribution of people with different opinions.
And I think if you have a big enough heart to be able to work diligently and well in the interests of the organization, and this is one of those things that's absolutely fundamental to a director. So if your organization, draw one from my experience, Fitness Australia.
Okay.
I think the whole idea of the people of Australia being fit and healthy is fantastic. Of course, I'm willing to work in an unpaid capacity and huge hours to help the organization that exists to bring that about. That is exactly the sort of thing that I would get excited about, would wish to contribute to. It is very, very important to think about, what are we doing on our boards? What sort of a world are we trying to create? What are we committed to? And is that really driving our actions, or are we just doing what our career path has led us to do and going through the motions? Because the best boards are the boards that really want to have an impact and that work together to have that impact. And the impact is indeed very much aligned with the best interests of the company, not so much aligned with the best financial outcomes for the company. And sometimes those two are quite different things.
So interesting. Well, Julie, we've covered, why people should join a board and why it's great, and we've also cautioned people about what's maybe you should not join a board if you're just going to be another pea in the pod, or if you're looking at it as an opportunity for personal gain. I mean, it's certainly great for your career because you'll learn more and it will expand you and be very satisfying, but you get to contribute. Now, I do want to touch on your personal experience because I'm all about resilience. and resilient finance, but also the things that you've touched on have caused me to think about that it is tough to be part of a workplace that might be a bit resistant. And so I had asked you before when we talked about this, what's some of the hard things that you've personally had to deal with boards, and how did you handle that?
Yeah, I think perhaps just a few of them. The first hard thing I had to deal with was when I wanted to really push my board career, and the first people that asked me to join their board were a company that I could not feel any personal enthusiasm for. And even though it would have been a good career move, I had to say no. And then stand up and square my shoulders and say, no, yeah, there will be another board. There are hundreds of thousands of boards in Australia. There will be one, and there's a board for everybody. But having the courage to say no to the wrong board and know that the right board will turn up if you go and look for it, was one area. I think another area that requires a lot of resilience, and which a lot of people who are on boards will be worrying about now, is that whole issue of taking on that personal responsibility and trying to turn around an enterprise that's getting into financial difficulties. I chaired a small listed company through a turnaround and a financial restructure and a recapitalization, and out the other side into a safe future, and the company is still going and still reasonably prosperous. But going into that, every time I looked at it, I thought, oh, they're such nice people. I love the products. The brand is still strong. People still love those products. People want them. We've got 156 families in Southeast Sydney depending on us for their livelihoods. This is important and valuable work, but it's dangerous. And if it all goes wrong, I could wind up being personally liable. And yeah, that one caused me quite a few sleepless nights as we put the deal together, restructured, refocused, and did some fairly interesting things. But again, having that strong family around you, having the courage to say, look, yeah, if I lose it all, as long as I've acted honestly, the chances are that I can lose it all and start again.
Right.
Does it? But also having a good marriage, a good education, a happy family life, you really do feel that maybe I can take a few financial risks along the way. But then again, having the right team around you in the board, and knowing that there was one particular director with whom I often disagreed, but we were both focused on saving the company. And by understanding why we disagreed and what were the risks that one of us could see that the other wasn't really considering to be too risky, we were able to make better decisions. Right. And at the end of the day, a lot of being on the board, particularly when times are getting tough, is about having the confidence in yourself that gives other people confidence in your leadership. And if people have confidence in your leadership, they back you and support you, and then it works. And it seems like magic, but it does work. So that was another character forming one. The other thing is that it's not easy to get on boards. You look for one, you make an approach, they ignore you, you try again, they ignore you. And you really do have to be quite resilient in saying, look, this is what I bring, this is what I offer, this is what I want to do, this is the impact I want to have on the world. And eventually you will find a board that needs and wants those abilities and skills and that focus and drive. It's, again, a matter of being resilient until suddenly it pays off.
I love it. That's so good. It's a world that I hadn't really considered before. And when I got to know you, it got me thinking and about the different decisions that have been made over the last few years with different boards and reading about them in the paper, in the news. Then, because it's not always paper anymore, is it? It's
No.
but also it's so timely. You know, I should have promoted this in that, you know, and mentioned COVID, the consequences of COVID for boards, because that was a significant part of this conversation. It was great. And I think I'll do that in the notes as well to say that we covered that. This has
Well, there are
been,
some boards that are making a lot more money now because of COVID.
well, yes. Yeah, there is that too. There's about that too. Now, what I would like to do is draw people's attention to your resources, Julie. Now, I'm going to share the your website with us. Here we go. Now, Julie's website is the Director's Dilemma, and I've popped it on here. directorsdilemma.com. Sorry, when we work from home, we have different sound effects that go on in the background. So, yeah, the directorsdilemma.com. Now, Julie, you are there. You're available to advise boards and organisations that have compliance interests that you can advise them on. Now, this I have a lot of connections to do with churches. So this is churches as well. You have boards, and you can fall into the same problem of being peas in a pod. You really need to have a diverse range of people. Yes, you can be of the same faith, but that doesn't mean that you've got the same interpretation of how things should be done. So it's good to have people who will push back and disagree with you, because it's healthy. It's not good for churches to be run just by one person. It's not how it's supposed to be. There's a fivefold ministry, not just one. And you'd know about that. So we have Julie at directorsdilemma.com. Now, she speaks. She's brilliant. That's her at what looks like a very important conference there, talking about corporate governance.
Yep, the Asian Corporate Governance Conference.
Yes, well, I didn't want to assume that it was Asia, but...
Yeah, the flowers are often a good giveaway. They do great flowers.
Oh, good. Very good. Okay. So now the Director's Dilemma, there is a newsletter that people can sign up for, and it's got great information in it that would be helpful for people if they want to go to that, directorsdilemma.com. And now you have got 5 books out. Oh,
Yep.
That's great. So, and you've got one for not-for-profits. So that's really helpful for people who are not in the corporate world but want to get it right. Dilemmas, practical case study. Now, case studies are so important. See, this is why Julie is interesting, because she uses case studies to illustrate what she's saying. You will not fall asleep in what Julie has got to say, and it's really important stuff. Like I said at the top of the interview, if I had known Julie when I was trying to battle my way out of problems with the fellow I was doing some work for, I would have had very clear answers, and I would not have breached the Corporations Act, and I would not have gone to prison. So getting the right advice can really stop you from ruining your life. So yay. So talk to Julie, invite her to come and speak, and have her consult you with your board and your decision making and your process. And for goodness sake, please get some diversity on your board, not because it's politically correct, but because it's healthy and good and great for you, much better for your company. You don't have to agree with what people say, but you can at least have people smart enough to not just say what should be, but explain why and the pros and cons. And then that give and take, like Julie said with that person she often disagreed with, it's healthy because it helps you to see things that you couldn't have seen before. Really, really important. Julie, is there anything else that you would like to add before we finish up here that might be of interest or helpful to people, or you'd like me to highlight?
No, other than the fact that if you are an organisation that's looking for directors, there are places you can go to find them. The Institute of Company Directors is chock full of people who've got the training and the knowledge and would love to have a go at the experience, there's a lovely little website called Our Community, which has a board and volunteer director matching service. So if you're a director who's looking for a board, go there. And if you are really thinking that you would love to make a career in the boardroom, that's brilliant, because directorship needs directors who love being directors. But for goodness sake, go out and get some sensible training from a reputable authority. You really don't know what you don't know until, unfortunately, sometimes sadly, you find out.
That is so true. So true. So as we finish up, Director's Dilemma for Julie. And this is Trish TV. And if you would like to have either of us come and speak, you can find me at speakertrishjenkins.com, speaking on resilience, courage, and leadership. And I want to encourage you all to share this broadcast that we're doing and really consider what's happening. You can get in touch with Julie via her website. And thank you for watching Trish TV. Thank you for coming, Julie.
It's a pleasure.